So this is an exercise where you're looking at improving the research work into two of the artists you have looked at previously. In some subjects, you might do this as a green pen exercise, but you don't need to use a green pen for art. So if you have a look at the work you've done, you can either choose two artists which you think you've done quite a good job of researching and make it even better, or you can choose an artist where perhaps you've missed out some details and you're going to try to improve those. So if you have achieved perhaps a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10, you want to be able to improve it to a level where you're getting it to an excellent or at least a secure. And if, of course, you've already achieved a high mark, you want to aim for a really high mark. So we'll choose today to improve this student's work on Lowry. So the first thing to do is to make a flapper. So if we make sure the work the flap out covers the section which has already been written. And then we'll put a fold about 1 centimetre on it, and that can then be finally stuck down there in Pritt Stick, and then it covers it up. Now, of course, the flap out gives you opportunity to write not only on the front, but also on the back as well. So here's a flap out I made earlier where I've put some guidelines on it. So let's have a look at this example. So I've written down some comments. So I've written down no W, which means he hasn't mentioned any works, any specific names of famous works. And then he says here, I like the pictures, architectural elements. So I've written down little t, so that's little technical details about the work. So he hasn't mentioned about the shading, he hasn't mentioned about what the work shows, etc. So let's look at making this a really high level. I'm going to start off in the same way. So if you look at what I've done there, I've actually copied out exactly what he's written for the first section, because actually it's very good. He says Lowry was born in Stretford, Manchester. He is best known for his images of matchstick men, cats and dogs set against industrial northern England, particularly Salford. He uses pale, prominent architecture and only 5 colours. He was very reserved, refusing honours and several different awards, including a knighthood. So he's actually, for this part on the artist's life, he's written 4 sentences instead of 3 sentences, so that's really good. So he hasn't, of course, mentioned any particularly famous piece of work by Lowry. So I'm going to have a little look on websites. So in this case, we'll have a look at Wikipedia, and we'll flick through and look at some of Lowry's work. So there's some examples of Lowry's work there, Going to the Match. There's Old Field Road Dwelling, Salford, etc. So I'm going to put some of these in. So some of Lowry's. So here I've written, some of Lowry's most famous works include Oldfield Road Dwellings, Salford, 1927 in the Tate Gallery, Going to Work, 1943 in the Imperial War Museum, and the Football Match, 1949, that was sold for a record £5.6 million in 2011. So not only have I mentioned some famous pieces of work, but I've also added a few extra details, for example, the date, or the gallery they're in, or a bit of trivia for the fact that this painting sold for such a lot of money. So now I've done good information on the artist's life. I've included information on the artist's most famous work, plus some extra facts. So now I need to write about what this picture shows and also the techniques. Here the student's only written, I like this picture's architectural elements. So let's think about what we can write about this. So what does it show? Well, it shows a view down the street and it's in pencil. Obviously you don't need to find out the name. What's happening in the street? Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4-story buildings. The street is full of people. Everything from older ladies with shopping bags to mothers with children, I presume, and then younger children walking and playing football. And there's even things like cats and dogs in the work. The buildings get lighter as they get further away into the distance. So that's what I see in the picture. And then finally, how is it shaded? Well, it seems to be drawn quite accurately and precisely. There's a real sense of distance in the work and is carefully shaded with many fine details in the figures and the windows. But Lowry seems to have done each building in different shades or different tones. So now we need to write up that information into 3, maybe 4 sentences which show an improvement on this very simple sentence, like I like the picture's architectural element. But we'll try and include that into the work. So in describing the work, I've said Lowry has drawn the work very carefully and added different tones to the buildings and many details like the individual window panes. Each building looks a different shade and the drawing gets a lot lighter in the distance. The road and pavement are very light and there is no sky detail. Now I could have written a lot more. I could have talked about how you had drawn the individual people, how he does legs, for example, which look a bit bendy and like they don't have a proper joint at the knee. Or I could write how he does this bit of smoke coming from the chimneys. So there's lots I could write, but now I've got to a stage where I've written over twice as much. I'll put some Pritt stick on there and stick that in there. And whereas this, because there's quite a bit missing, wouldn't achieve a secure, that would be good enough to achieve an excellence. And finally, you have to do that for 2 artists.